Rebecca Matthews stood at the edge of the high school gymnasium, watching her classmates dance while she remained invisible against the wall. At 6 feet 2 inches tall, she towered over most of the boys in her graduating class of 1987, and the few who matched her height seemed terrified to approach her. The spring formal was supposed to be magical, but for Rebecca, it felt like another reminder of how different she was. "Look at that giant over there," whispered Ashley Morrison, one of the popular girls, loud enough for Rebecca to hear. "I heard she has to shop in the men's section for shoes. What guy would ever want to date that?" Rebecca's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she kept her composure. This wasn't the first time she'd heard such comments, and it wouldn't be the last. Growing up in the small town of Millfield, Oklahoma, being different meant being a target. Her height had always made her stand out, but as she entered her teenage years, it became a source of constant ridicule. The next Monday at school, things got worse. Rebecca walked into her chemistry class to find a crude drawing on the blackboard depicting a stick-figure woman towering over tiny men, with the caption, "Rebecca's dadding pool," written underneath. The entire class erupted in laughter as she took her seat, her face turning crimson. "That's enough," said Mr. Peterson, the chemistry teacher, but his attempt to restore order was half-hearted. Even some of the teachers seemed to find her height amusing rather than treating her with the respect she deserved. During lunch, Rebecca sat alone as usual, picking at her sandwich while overhearing conversations from nearby tables. The football players were particularly cruel, making jokes about how she could play center without even jumping. The cheerleaders weren't much better, suggesting that no dress would ever look right on someone built like a telephone pole. "Maybe she should just accept that she's meant to be alone," said Brittany Walsh, the head cheerleader. "I mean, what man wants to feel emasculated by his wife being taller than him? It's not natural." These words cut deeper than any physical wound could have. Rebecca had dreams like any other 17-year-old girl. She wanted to fall in love, get married, have children, and build a life with someone special. But the constant ridicule made her question whether those dreams were realistic for someone like her. After school, Rebecca found solace in the town library, where Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian, always treated her with kindness. The older woman had watched Rebecca grow up and had seen the toll the bullying was taking on the young woman's spirit. "You know, dear," Mrs. Henderson said one afternoon as Rebecca shelved books, "I've lived long enough to see that the people who mock others for being different are usually the ones who are most afraid of being different themselves. Your height isn't a flaw, it's part of what makes you unique and beautiful." Rebecca smiled weakly, appreciating the kindness but still feeling the weight of her classmates' words. "It's hard to believe that when everyone else sees it as something wrong with me." The right person won't see it that way, Mrs. Henderson assured her. Trust me on that. As graduation approached, Rebecca's mother, Linda Matthews, grew increasingly concerned about her daughter's self-esteem. Linda herself was of average height and sometimes struggled to understand what her daughter was going through, but she could see the pain in Rebecca's eyes every day. Maybe you should consider modeling, Linda suggested one evening over dinner. You have the height for it, and you're beautiful. It could be a way to turn what others see as different into something positive. Rebecca had considered this before, but the fashion industry seemed so far removed from life in small-town Oklahoma. Besides, the constant criticism had eroded her confidence to the point where she couldn't imagine anyone seeing her as beautiful enough to model. The senior class trip to the state capitol provided another opportunity for humiliation. When the students were paired up for the buddy system, Rebecca was left without a partner because no one wanted to be seen walking around with the giant. She ended up being paired with Mrs. Coleman, one of the chaperones, which only added to her embarrassment. At the State Museum, a group of her classmates posed for pictures next to a statue of a famous historical figure, making jokes about how Rebecca was taller than most of the monuments. The photographer, trying to be helpful, suggested she kneel for the group photo so she wouldn't tower over everyone else. That night in the hotel, Rebecca called her mother crying. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Mom. Maybe I should just accept that I'm never going to be normal." Linda's heart broke hearing her daughter's pain. "Sweetheart, normal is overrated. You are perfect exactly as you are, and someday someone is going to appreciate everything about you, including your height." The prom came and went without Rebecca attending. She spent that night at home, watching romantic movies and wondering if she would ever experience the kind of love she saw on screen. Her mother tried to convince her to go stag with a group of friends, but Rebecca couldn't bear the thought of being the only girl without a date, standing head and shoulders above everyone else on the dance floor. Graduation day arrived with mixed emotions. Rebecca was valedictorian, having thrown herself into her studies as an escape from social rejection. As she stood at the podium to deliver her speech, she looked out at her classmates and felt a mixture of pride and sadness. She had accomplished so much academically, but she was leaving high school feeling like she had missed out on the social experiences that seemed to come so naturally to others. In her speech, she talked about overcoming challenges and staying true to yourself, though she wondered if she was being hypocritical. Had she stayed true to herself, or had she allowed others to diminish her sense of self-worth? The applause was polite but lukewarm, and she couldn't help but notice some of her classmates exchanging glances and smirks. After the ceremony, Rebecca's extended family gathered for a celebration dinner. Her Aunt Margaret, who had always been supportive, pulled her aside for a private conversation. "I know this has been a difficult time for you," Margaret said, "but I want you to know that your height is a gift, not a curse. I've seen how people treat you, and it's wrong. But don't let their small-mindedness make you small. You're destined for something bigger than this town and these people." As summer progressed, Rebecca prepared for college at Oklahoma State University. She was excited about the opportunity for a fresh start, hoping that a larger, more diverse environment would be more accepting. However, the wounds from high school ran deep, and she found herself approaching social situations with extreme caution. Her mother noticed that Rebecca had started slouching, trying to appear shorter, and it broke her heart. "Stand up straight, honey," she would say. "You're beautiful, and you should be proud of who you are." But the damage had been done. Years of mockery and rejection had convinced Rebecca that her height made her undesirable as a romantic partner. She began to believe that she would have to choose between being alone or settling for someone who merely tolerated her appearance rather than celebrating it. The week before leaving for college, Rebecca ran into some of her former classmates at the local grocery store. Ashley Morrison, now working as a cashier, made a snide comment about Rebecca, still growing, and asked if she had to special order her clothes from a catalog. "Actually," Rebecca replied with as much dignity as she could muster, "I'm starting college next week. I got a full academic scholarship." Ashley's expression soured. "Well, good for you. I'm sure all that studying was worth missing out on having any fun in high school." As Rebecca walked away, she realized that Ashley's comment revealed more about Ashley's own insecurities than it did about Rebecca's choices. Still, the encounter left her feeling deflated as she prepared to start the next chapter of her life. The night before leaving for college, Rebecca stood in front of her bedroom mirror, looking at her reflection. She was indeed tall, taller than most men she knew, but for the first time in a long while, she tried to see herself through different eyes. Maybe Mrs. Henderson and her mother were right. Maybe her height wasn't something to be ashamed of, but something that made her unique and strong. As she packed her belongings, Rebecca made a silent promise to herself. College would be different. She would work on rebuilding her confidence and not let the cruel words of her past define her future. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she was determined to find out if there was indeed someone out there who would see her height not as a flaw to be overlooked, but as one of the many things that made her remarkable. The moving truck pulled away from the Matthews house the next morning, taking Rebecca toward her uncertain but hopeful future. As Millfield disappeared in the rearview mirror, she felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. She was leaving behind the people who had made her feel less than worthy, but she was also stepping into the unknown, carrying with her the scars of their words and the fragile hope that somewhere out there, things could be different. Oklahoma State University sprawled across Stillwater like a small city, and Rebecca felt both excited and overwhelmed as she arrived for freshman orientation. The campus was massive compared to anything she had experienced in Millfield, and for the first time in years, she felt truly anonymous. No one knew her as the tall girl. She was just another incoming freshman trying to find her way. Her roommate, Jennifer Walsh from Dallas, was a petite brunette who seemed friendly enough during their initial meeting. Jennifer was bubbly and outgoing, the complete opposite of Rebecca's more reserved nature. When Jennifer first saw Rebecca, her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly recovered and welcomed her warmly. "Wow, you're really tall," Jennifer said with a smile. "That's so cool. I bet you were amazing at basketball in high school." Rebecca tensed, waiting for the inevitable jokes or awkward comments, but they never came. Jennifer seemed genuinely impressed rather than critical, and this small difference in reaction gave Rebecca a tiny spark of hope. "I actually never played sports," Rebecca admitted. "I was more focused on academics." "That's awesome too," Jennifer replied enthusiastically. "I'm terrible at sports, so I have mad respect for people who excel at anything physical or intellectual." The first few weeks of college were a whirlwind of classes, social events, and new experiences. Rebecca threw herself into her studies, majoring in architecture, a field that seemed to appreciate height and different perspectives. Her professors were professional and respectful, treating her like any other student rather than focusing on her physical appearance. However, the social aspects of college life proved more challenging. At parties and mixers, Rebecca still felt self-conscious about her height. She noticed how other girls seemed to effortlessly attract attention from male students while she remained largely overlooked. The few times men did approach her, it was often with comments like, "How's the weather up there?" or "Do you play volleyball?" which immediately killed any potential for meaningful conversation. Jennifer tried to be supportive, often inviting Rebecca to social events and introducing her to people. But Rebecca could sense the awkwardness when she would tower over groups of students, and she began declining invitations to avoid the uncomfortable situations. "You can't hide in your room forever," Jennifer said one evening as Rebecca declined yet another party invitation. "College is about more than just studying. You need to put yourself out there." "It's not that simple," Rebecca replied, not wanting to burden her roommate with the full extent of her insecurities. "I'm just more comfortable focusing on my schoolwork right now." Jennifer meant well, but she couldn't truly understand what it was like to feel like a spectacle everywhere you went. Rebecca had developed a hyper-awareness of her height, constantly calculating doorway clearances, chair heights, and group photo logistics. It was exhausting to navigate the world while feeling like you didn't quite fit into it. Despite these challenges, Rebecca found some refuge in her architecture classes. Professor Williams, a respected architect who had worked on several notable buildings in Oklahoma City, seemed to appreciate Rebecca's unique perspective on spatial relationships and design challenges. Height gives you a different view of how spaces work, he told her after class one day. Most architects have to imagine how a space feels from different vantage points, but you naturally see things that others miss. That's a valuable asset in this field. These words of encouragement meant more to Rebecca than Professor Williams probably realized. For so long, she had been told that her height was a disadvantage, but here was someone suggesting it could actually be a professional strength. As her freshman year progressed, Rebecca began to gain confidence in her academic abilities, even if her social life remained limited. She joined the Architecture Student Association and found that her contributions to project discussions were valued and respected. Her height, which had once made her feel like an outsider, actually helped her understand building proportions and human-scale relationships in ways that impressed her professors and classmates. The spring semester brought new challenges and opportunities. Rebecca was selected for a competitive internship with a local architectural firm, partly based on her exceptional academic performance and her demonstrated understanding of spatial design principles. The internship would take place during the summer, giving her real-world experience in the field she was growing to love. At the architectural firm of Morrison and Associates, no relation to Ashley Morrison from high school, much to Rebecca's relief. She worked under the supervision of Maria Santos, a successful female architect who had broken barriers in the male-dominated field during the 1970s. Maria was an inspiring figure, confident, accomplished, and unapologetically herself. She was also tall, though not quite as tall as Rebecca, and she carried herself with a dignity and presence that commanded respect. On Rebecca's first day, Maria gave her some advice that would prove to be life-changing. "I can see you're self-conscious about your height," Maria said during their lunch meeting. "I went through the same thing when I was younger. But let me tell you something, in architecture and in life, taking up space isn't something to apologize for. Your physical presence should match your intellectual presence. Stand tall, literally and figuratively." Working at the firm, Rebecca encountered clients, contractors, and other professionals who treated her with the respect due to someone in her position. Her height, rather than being a source of mockery, actually seemed to give her a certain gravitas in professional settings. Clients took her seriously, and contractors paid attention when she spoke at job sites. One particularly memorable project involved designing a custom home for the Hendricks family, who had specific needs due to Mr. Hendricks being a former professional basketball player, standing 6 feet 8 inches tall. Rebecca's personal experience with height-related spatial challenges made her uniquely qualified to understand their requirements. Finally, someone who gets it, Mrs. Hendricks said during their consultation. We've worked with 3 other architects who kept designing spaces that work for average height people, but would make my husband feel cramped and uncomfortable. Rebecca threw herself into the project, designing custom ceiling heights, appropriately scaled fixtures, and furniture arrangements that would accommodate the family's needs while maintaining aesthetic appeal. The project was a resounding success, earning praise from both the clients and her supervisors at the firm. As the summer internship progressed, Rebecca began to see her height as a professional asset rather than a personal liability. However, her romantic life remained non-existent. She had been on a few awkward dates arranged by well-meaning friends, but they invariably ended with the man making uncomfortable comments about her height or suggesting she wear flat shoes to appear more normal. One particularly painful date involved a fellow architecture student named David, whom Rebecca had developed a crush on during the spring semester. They had worked together on several projects, and she thought they had developed a genuine connection based on their shared interests and intellectual compatibility. The date started well, with dinner at a nice restaurant and engaging conversation about their career goals and design philosophies. However, when they stood up to leave, David seemed to suddenly become aware of their height difference. Rebecca was about 3 inches taller than him. "You know," he said awkwardly as they walked to his car, "maybe you should consider wearing shorter heels when we go out. I don't want people to think, well, you know." Rebecca's heart sank. Even someone who knew her professionally and respected her intellectually couldn't accept her height in a romantic context. She politely declined his offer for a second date, citing busy schedules, but the rejection stung deeply. That night, Rebecca called her mother, feeling discouraged despite her professional successes. "Maybe I should just accept that I'm meant to focus on my career," she told Linda. "It seems like men can appreciate my mind and my professional abilities, but when it comes to romance, my height is always going to be a barrier." Linda tried to reassure her daughter, but Rebecca could hear the concern in her voice. Both women were beginning to wonder if the critics back in Millfield had been right. Perhaps Rebecca was indeed too tall for traditional romantic relationships. As her sophomore year began, Rebecca threw herself even more deeply into her studies and professional development. She maintained excellent grades, took on leadership roles in student organizations, and continued to impress her professors with her innovative design solutions. However, she also began to build emotional walls around herself, protecting her heart from further romantic disappointment. The architecture program required students to work in teams frequently, and Rebecca found herself naturally taking on leadership roles due to her knowledge, work ethic, and increasingly confident professional demeanor. Her teammates respected her expertise and looked to her for guidance on complex projects. During one particularly challenging studio project, Rebecca's team was tasked with designing a mixed-use development that would serve a diverse community with varying needs. Her personal experience with feeling like an outsider gave her insights into inclusive design principles that her teammates hadn't considered. We need to think about people who don't fit the standard mold, she explained during a team meeting. What about accessibility for people with disabilities, families with multiple generations living together, or individuals who are significantly taller or shorter than average? Good design should accommodate diversity, not force everyone to conform to one standard. Her teammate Marcus, an outgoing guy from Oklahoma City, was impressed by her perspective. "I never thought about it that way," he said. "You always seem to see things the rest of us miss." Rebecca appreciated the professional recognition, but she couldn't help but notice that Marcus, like most of her male classmates, seemed to see her as a colleague and friend rather than someone he might be romantically interested in. The pattern was becoming depressingly familiar. As winter break approached, Rebecca dreaded returning to Millfield, where she would inevitably encounter her former classmates and be reminded of all the cruel comments about her unmarried state. Sure enough, at the annual Christmas party hosted by her mother's friend, she overheard familiar voices discussing her situation. "I heard Rebecca is doing really well in college," said one woman. "But she's still single, isn't she? Such a shame. She's such a smart girl, but—" The unfinished sentence hung in the air, heavy with implication. Rebecca excused herself from the party early, telling her mother she wasn't feeling well. As she drove home through the quiet streets of her hometown, she made a decision that would shape the next phase of her life. She would stop hopping for romantic love and instead channel all her energy into building an exceptional career. If she was destined to be alone, she would at least be accomplished and financially independent. The little girl who had dreamed of a fairy tale romance would have to grow up and accept reality. But sometimes life has other plans. Rebecca's junior year at Oklahoma State brought new opportunities and challenges. She had been selected for an advanced studio course that would culminate in a competition for the best senior thesis project. The winner would receive a significant scholarship and an opportunity to work with a prestigious architectural firm in Dallas after graduation. The competition was fierce, with 30 students vying for the top prize. Rebecca threw herself into the preliminary research phase, exploring innovative approaches to sustainable housing design. Her project focused on creating affordable, environmentally friendly homes that could be adapted for different family sizes and needs. Professor Williams announced that the competition would include a presentation component, where students would pitch their projects to a panel of professional architects, city planners, and potential investors. Rebecca felt confident about her design work, but nervous about the presentation aspect. Despite her growing professional confidence, she still struggled with being the center of attention. As she prepared her presentation materials, Rebecca decided to lean into her personal experiences with feeling like an outsider. Her thesis project, titled Inclusive Spaces, Designing for Diversity, incorporated universal design principles that would accommodate people of all heights, abilities, and family structures. The night before the presentation, Rebecca practiced her pitch in front of her roommate Jennifer, who had remained supportive throughout their years together. "You're going to kill it tomorrow," Jennifer said encouragingly. "Your project is amazing, and you're the most passionate person I know when you talk about architecture. I just hope I don't freeze up when I'm standing in front of all those professionals," Rebecca admitted. "Sometimes I still feel like that awkward high school girl who everyone stared at." "That's not who you are anymore," Jennifer replied firmly. "You're Rebecca Matthews, brilliant architecture student and future leader in sustainable design. Don't let old insecurities sabotage your success." The presentation day arrived gray and drizzly, matching Rebecca's nervous mood. The competition was being held in the university's main auditorium, with the panel of judges seated at a long table facing the stage. Rebecca was scheduled to present third, giving her time to observe the first two presentations while fighting off butterflies in her stomach. The first presenter, a confident male student named Brett, delivered a polished presentation about high-rise commercial development. His project was technically sound but lacked innovation. The second presenter, Sarah Kim, proposed a series of artistic installations integrated into urban planning, which was creative but seemed impractical for actual implementation. When Rebecca's name was called, she walked to the podium with her head held high, channeling Maria Santos's advice about taking up space without apology. As she began her presentation, something clicked. Her nervousness transformed into passion as she explained how traditional architectural approaches often ignored the needs of people who didn't fit standard demographics. "Too often, we design for an imaginary average person," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But what about the single mother who needs flexible living spaces? What about the elderly person who can't climb stairs? What about the very tall individual who hits their head on standard door frames, or the wheelchair user who can't reach standard countertops?" She clicked through her presentation slides, showing innovative design solutions that addressed these concerns while maintaining aesthetic appeal and cost-effectiveness. Her sustainable housing prototypes featured adjustable elements, flexible room configurations, and universal accessibility features. The judges seemed engaged, asking thoughtful questions about implementation costs, building codes, and market feasibility. Rebecca answered confidently, drawing on her internship experience and extensive research. For 20 minutes, she forgot about her height, her insecurities, and her romantic disappointments. She was simply a talented architect sharing innovative solutions to real-world problems. When she finished, the auditorium was quiet for a moment before breaking into applause. Rebecca felt a rush of accomplishment as she walked back to her seat, finally understanding what it felt like to be recognized for her ideas rather than her appearance. The judges deliberated for what felt like hours before Professor Williams returned to announce the results. Third place went to Sarah Kim for creativity. Second place went to Brett for technical excellence. Rebecca held her breath as Professor Williams smiled and looked directly at her. First place, for innovative design with practical applications and social consciousness, goes to Rebecca Matthews for inclusive spaces, designing for diversity. The auditorium erupted in applause as Rebecca walked to the stage in a daze. She had won not just the competition, but validation that her perspective, shaped by years of feeling like an outsider, had real value in her chosen profession. During the reception following the competition, Rebecca was approached by several of the judges who wanted to discuss her project further. One of them, Thomas Chen, was a senior partner at a Dallas firm that specialized in sustainable and inclusive design. "I've been in this business for 25 years," Thomas told her, "and I've rarely seen a student project that so effectively combines social consciousness with practical applications. Would you be interested in discussing an internship opportunity with our firm this summer?" Rebecca could hardly believe what she was hearing. Not only had she won the competition, but she was being recruited by one of the most respected firms in the region. For the first time in her life, her height seemed completely irrelevant to her success. As the reception wound down, Rebecca called her mother to share the good news. Linda cried with joy and pride, telling Rebecca how proud she was of her daughter's accomplishments. "I always knew you were destined for great things," Linda said through happy tears. "You've worked so hard to get where you are, and you deserve every bit of this success." That night, Rebecca celebrated with Jennifer and a few close friends from the architecture program. As she looked around the table at people who respected and valued her for her intelligence and creativity, she realized how much her life had changed since those painful high school days. She still hadn't found romantic love, and that absence still stung sometimes, but she was building a life filled with purpose and achievement. Maybe that would have to be enough. Maybe some people were meant to find fulfillment in their work rather than in traditional relationships. As her junior year drew to a close, Rebecca prepared for her summer internship in Dallas with excitement and anticipation. She had no way of knowing that this internship would lead to an encounter that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and her future. The move to Dallas for her summer internship felt like stepping into a completely different world. The city sprawled endlessly in all directions, filled with gleaming skyscrapers, bustling highways, and more people than Rebecca had ever seen in one place. Thomas Chen's firm, Sustainable Spaces Architecture, occupied 2 floors of a modern building in the downtown arts district. On her first day, Thomas introduced Rebecca to the team she would be working with on a major project, the design of a new community center in East Dallas. The building would serve a diverse neighborhood with significant immigrant populations, and the firm had been specifically chosen because of their expertise in inclusive design. "This project is right up your alley," Thomas told Rebecca as he showed her the project files. "The community has very specific needs, and traditional architectural approaches haven't been working. We need someone who thinks outside the box." Rebecca's team included 3 other architects: Patricia Reeves, a seasoned professional in her 40s, Miguel Santos, a talented designer in his early 30s, and Jake Thompson, a recent graduate who had joined the firm 6 months earlier. All 3 were welcoming and professional, treating Rebecca as a valuable team member despite her intern status. The project required extensive community outreach, which meant spending time in East Dallas talking to residents about their needs and preferences. Rebecca found this aspect of the work particularly rewarding, as it allowed her to use her communication skills and her understanding of what it felt like to be overlooked or misunderstood. During one community meeting, an elderly Vietnamese woman named Mrs. Nguyen spoke about how the current community center felt unwelcoming because the spaces were too cramped and the layout was confusing for people who weren't familiar with American building conventions. "We need spaces that feel like home," Mrs. Nguyen said through a translator. "Places where our families can gather comfortably, where our children can play safely, where our elders can sit and talk without feeling like they're in the way." Rebecca took extensive notes, her mind already working on design solutions that would address these concerns. After the meeting, she stayed behind to sketch some preliminary ideas, losing track of time as she worked. "You're still here." Rebecca looked up to see a man standing in the doorway of the community center. He was extraordinarily tall, even taller than she was, with broad shoulders, dark hair, and kind eyes. He wore work clothes covered in sawdust and paint, suggesting he was involved in some kind of construction or renovation work. Oh, sorry, Rebecca said, suddenly self-conscious. I was just working on some design ideas for the new community center. I'm with the architectural firm that's been hired for the project. The man smiled, and Rebecca noticed that he had to duck slightly to clear the doorway as he entered the room. I'm Nathan Blue Eagle, he said, extending a paint-stained hand. I've been helping with renovations on the current building while you all figure out what comes next. Rebecca Matthews, she replied, shaking his hand and trying not to stare. It was unusual enough to meet someone taller than herself, but Nathan seemed completely comfortable with his height, carrying himself with quiet confidence. Mind if I take a look at what you're working on? Nathan asked, nodding toward her sketches. I've been working in this community for a while, and I might have some insights. Rebecca hesitated for a moment, then turned her sketchpad toward him. Nathan studied her preliminary drawings with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about her design choices and offering observations about how different spaces in the current building were actually used by community members. You've got some good ideas here, he said after reviewing her work. But you might want to consider making this gathering space even larger. The Vietnamese families often have 3 or 4 generations present at community events, and the Mexican families like to set up food stations that take up more room than you might expect. Rebecca made notes based on Nathan's suggestions, impressed by his practical knowledge of the community's needs. How long have you been working in this neighborhood? She asked. About 3 years, Nathan replied. I started volunteering here after I moved to Dallas, and now I do renovation and construction work for several community organizations. I grew up on a reservation in Oklahoma, so I understand what it's like to be part of a community that doesn't always fit into mainstream American society. Rebecca looked up from her notes, struck by his comment about not fitting into mainstream society. What reservation are you from? Cherokee Nation up near Tahlequah, Nathan said. My full name is Nathan Blue Eagle, but most people just call me Nathan. What about you? You don't sound like you're from Texas. Oklahoma, too, actually. A small town called Millfield, about 2 hours south of Oklahoma City. Rebecca found herself relaxing as they talked, enjoying the conversation with someone who seemed to understand the complexities of identity and belonging. They talked for another hour about the community center project, their shared Oklahoma background, and their experiences feeling like outsiders in various situations. Rebecca was struck by how comfortable Nathan seemed with himself, how he never apologized for taking up space or tried to make himself smaller in any way. As they prepared to leave, Nathan offered to show Rebecca some other community spaces in the neighborhood that might provide inspiration for her design work. There's a community garden a few blocks from here that has some interesting gathering areas, he said. and a small church that has done some creative things with flexible seating arrangements. Rebecca agreed to the impromptu tour, and they spent the next 2 hours walking through East Dallas as Nathan pointed out architectural details and explained how different spaces were used by various cultural groups. His knowledge was impressive, and his genuine care for the community was evident in every story he told. When they finally parted ways, Rebecca realized she had spent more time talking to Nathan than she had talked to any man in months, and her height had never once been mentioned or seemed to be an issue. He had looked her directly in the eye when they spoke, never glancing up or down or making any comments about their relative heights. That night in her temporary apartment, Rebecca found herself thinking about Nathan as she refined her design sketches based on their conversation. There was something different about him, something that made her feel comfortable in her own skin in a way she hadn't experienced before. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca found excuses to visit the community center when Nathan was working there. They would chat about the renovation progress, the neighborhood, and their respective work. Nathan shared stories about growing up on the reservation, learning traditional building techniques from his grandfather, and his decision to move to Dallas to expand his construction skills. My grandfather always said that a house should be built for the people who will live in it, not for some abstract idea of what a house should look like. Nathan told her one afternoon as they sat on the front steps of the community center. He taught me to think about how spaces make people feel, not just how they look. Rebecca was fascinated by this philosophy, which aligned closely with her own approach to inclusive design. That's exactly what I'm trying to do with my architecture projects, she said. Too many buildings are designed for imaginary average people instead of real human beings with diverse needs. As their friendship developed, Rebecca began to realize that Nathan treated her differently than other men she had known. He never made her feel self-conscious about her height, never suggested she should dress or behave differently, and genuinely seemed to value her opinions and perspectives. More importantly, he treated their height similarity as completely unremarkable. One evening, Nathan invited Rebecca to join him for dinner at a small Mexican restaurant in the neighborhood. As they sat across from each other in a cramped booth, Rebecca realized this felt different from the awkward dates she had endured in college. Nathan was easy to talk to, intellectually engaging, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her as a person. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said as they shared a plate of enchiladas. "Doesn't my height bother you? Most men seem uncomfortable with women who are as tall as they are." Nathan looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Why would your height bother me? You're tall, I'm tall, so what? It just means we can both reach the top shelf at the grocery store." His matter-of-fact response was so different from the reactions she was used to that Rebecca felt tears welling up in her eyes. Nathan noticed her emotional response and reached across the table to gently touch her hand. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked with concern. "Did I say something to upset you?" Rebecca wiped her eyes, embarrassed by her reaction. "No, it's not that. It's just. No one has ever said that before. Usually, men either make jokes about my height or suggest ways I could appear shorter. You're the first person who has ever made it seem like it's not a big deal." Nathan's expression grew serious. "Rebecca, your height is part of who you are, just like your intelligence, your creativity, and your kindness. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve your attention. You're beautiful exactly as you are." These words, spoken with such sincerity and conviction, broke through years of insecurity and self-doubt. For the first time since high school, Rebecca allowed herself to believe that maybe she was worthy of love and acceptance just as she was. As the summer progressed, Rebecca and Nathan spent more time together, exploring Dallas, working on community projects, and getting to know each other on a deeper level. Nathan told her about his Cherokee heritage, his family's struggles with poverty and discrimination, and his determination to build a better life while staying connected to his cultural roots. Rebecca shared her own stories about growing up feeling like an outsider, the cruelty of her high school classmates, and her decision to focus on career success after repeated romantic disappointments. Nathan listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding without trying to minimize her experiences. People can be cruel when they encounter someone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of normal, Nathan said one evening as they walked along the Trinity River. "I faced some of that too, being Native American in predominantly white spaces, but their limitations don't define our worth." Rebecca found herself falling for Nathan in a way she had never experienced before. He saw her as a complete person, tall, intelligent, creative, sensitive, without trying to change or minimize any aspect of who she was.